Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Stephen Brown, and in today's video, guys, we got a little bit of everything to talk about when it comes to the Toronto Maple Leafs. I want to go over their last couple of games played. I want to talk about Morgan Rielly, but also the top six, the bottom six, the goaltending, and maybe what this team is looking at acquiring as we move closer towards the trade deadline. If we go back to January the 14th, the day before the Maple Leafs took on the Boston Bruins, it was noted that there was a bit of a flu bug going around the locker room at the time. And that's not me trying to make an excuse for them, because some of the lapses that we've seen have been an ongoing issue over the last couple of months or so. But in that game against the Red Wings where they had lost 4-1, and even in the first couple of periods against the Panthers where they looked really, really sloppy, especially on the power play, you can't discard the flu going around the locker room as maybe being a contributing factor to some of that, at least. But just to go back to that game against the Boston Bruins for a minute or so, because it was one of the bigger games on the schedule over the last month or so. And really, games like that are no-win scenarios, because if you win the game, it's just another game in January. But if you lose the game, it inevitably becomes part of the larger overarching narrative that people want to put on the team. And I can prove that to you because going into that game, the Leafs had actually won the previous 4 against the Boston Bruins, and the narrative coming out of it wasn't, oh, the Leafs have won 4 of the last 5 games against the Bruins. That's pretty good. The narrative was the Leafs are nowhere close to being as good as Boston. Usually it lands somewhere in the middle, right? Because if you looked at the box score from this game, you saw the score and the number of shots, you'd think that the Leafs got heavily outplayed. But if you watched the game, you would have saw a very close back and forth affair that either team could have won. And then if you dug a bit deeper and looked at the advanced numbers, you would see a game that was a very close back and forth affair that either team could have won. And am I trying to say that there's a moral victory from losing this game? No, there were definitely some things that the Leafs could have cleaned up in their own zone and in the neutral zone that maybe could have prevented some costly turnovers that ended up losing them the game. But is there this large gap between them and the Boston Bruins this year, even though the Bruins are far and away the best team in the league? No, I think the Leafs are a lot closer than people want to give them credit for, and if they're able to clean up some of those things, I'm excited for the next game between these two teams, because the one that we saw last Saturday night was fun as hell. Part of the reason why the Leafs turned the puck over so much in that game was because the Boston forecheck was just very relentless and very effective, and I'm not going to make any excuses for them. They didn't have TJ Brodie in the lineup, and Brodie's one of the Maple Leafs' best defenders in terms of handling oncoming forecheckers, because the guys who are making the turnovers were Morgan Rielly and John Tavares, and those guys just need to be better in those situations. But I'm also not going to pretend like not having TJ Brodie in the lineup didn't play a factor as well. Speaking of TJ Brodie, his rib injury, which was said to keep him out for about 2 weeks or so, about a week and a half ago, is progressing well. He was skating on the ice today. I don't think he's going to play in the game tonight against the Jets, but should be back in the next couple of games, which is going to be a huge boost to this team. But coming back to Morgan Rielly for a minute, if we're looking at how the Maple Leafs have played with him versus without him on the ice so far this season, they have been a better overall team without him. And while that is true, the idea that the Leafs would be better off without him entirely remains just the biggest joke to me. Because if we're going back and looking at the numbers from just last season, out of over 70 defensemen to play at least 400 minutes against elite competition, in terms of the quality of unblocked shot attempts, Morgan Rielly was second in the entire NHL, and the Leafs also outscored elite competition 36-20 with him on the ice, despite having some of the worst goaltending in the entire NHL. The solution is not to get rid of Morgan Rielly, but to help and hope that he regains his form from last season, because there's no way that you're going to tell me that there's not room for somebody like that on their blue line. I hardly ever come down this harsh on anything, but the conversation surrounding Morgan Rielly this year has been an absolute joke. The idea that the Leafs would be better off without a guy who outscored elite competition 36-20, despite having some of the worst goaltending in the entire league, the idea that they would be better off without a guy that controlled the quality of unblocked shot attempts better than 90% of his peers against elite competition last year, the idea that they would be better off without a guy like that is an absolute joke. Now, am I saying that he's played well this year? No, he's been bad. The solution is not to get rid of him. I'm sorry, you're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong. The solution is to hope that he gets back to that form and to hope that he starts playing better, because the Maple Leafs need that defenseman. Any team in the league would need that defenseman. To bring the conversation back down a couple of notches here, Morgan Rielly has had 6 different defensive partners so far this year, mainly because of his struggles. You know, you want to try different things to try to get your number one defenseman going. But at the same time, there has been combinations that have worked better than others. Him and Connor Timmins, never want to see that again. Him and Justin Holl, I thought we were done with that 2 years ago. Figure out which combination works, and if you don't have one that works, well, maybe it's not the question of whether or not the Maple Leafs need to upgrade this blue line, but they need to find a better fit. They need Morgan Rielly to be as good as he was last season. And just to touch on the contract, because this is the first year of the 8-year deal that Rielly signed last year, where he's making $7.5 million a season. He's the 23rd highest paid defenseman in the NHL, and so far this year, he hasn't been anywhere close to the 23rd best defenseman in the league. He needs to be better. He needs to be better on his own, and maybe the coaching staff can help him out with finding some more consistency and chemistry with his D partner. I think that that's fair. But just because the Leafs played well defensively for about a month or so without him, does not mean that they do not need him. Again, just to emphasize it, you're not going to tell me that there's no room on their blue line for a guy who outscored elite competition 36-20 when he was on the ice last year, despite having some of the worst goaltending in the entire league. Now, if he's still a pumpkin 2 months from now, yeah, I'll be absolutely right there with you. It's not good. But it seems like the Leafs are locked into a first-round series with the Tampa Bay Lightning. You got about 40 games or so. Try some different stuff and figure it out. You got time. Now, like I just finished saying, the Maple Leafs are seemingly locked into a first-round matchup with the Tampa Bay Lightning. And the next 40 games or so are going to be about figuring out what you got with certain guys. And for a guy like Matt Murray, who's got an .884 save percentage in his last 10 games, 4 out of those 10 games, he had a save percentage of .920 or better. So we're starting to see maybe there's some consistency issues with Matt Murray, but after that game against the Panthers, he had played 5 out of the last 7 games for the Leafs. And that's more of a starter's workload and not necessarily a tandem goalie's workload. I know a lot of people were saying Samsonov should have started that game, but like I said, 40 games left. You got to figure out what you got with certain guys. And if Matt Murray can't be that guy who plays on a regular basis or takes on that starter's workload, well, then that's something that they need to figure out before the playoffs start, right? Because even if you're riding the hot hand, if he is hot at that time, if he can't handle playing every day, well, then that's a bit of a problem too. But Samsonov's played quite well over his last couple of games. He gets to start tonight against the Jets, so we'll see how things play out over the next 40 games or so. Maybe it's not the case, and we're not worried about this at all a month from now. Just to check in on the top end guys since the beginning of the new year, it's been Mitch Marner and John Tavares leading the way for the Leafs. Like we said, Tavares looked a little bit brutal on that turnover in the game against the Bruins, but he's got 5 goals in his last 8 games, and he's seeming to pick up the offense right where he left off to start the year after he had a bit of a slow December, where he was getting his opportunities but not necessarily burying them. William Nylander's been fantastic all season long, had 2 goals, was a large reason why they were able to come back against the Panthers, and Matthews had that buzzer beater to end the second period. He's got 3 goals in his last 3 games. He's on an 8-game point streak. Yeah, he's been dealing with a bit of an injury so far this year, and they're managing it. You know, like we said, the rest of this season is going to be about figuring out what they got with certain guys and staying or getting healthy. But the top end guys have played well the last little bit. The next thing I wanted to touch on was the bottom 6, because there was a bit of a weird transaction yesterday where they had loaned Pontus Homeberg down to the American Hockey League, and some people were scratching their heads because Pontus Homeberg's played pretty well ever since getting called up from the Marlies earlier on in the year. But Sheldon Keefe today saying that it's nothing more than basically a conditioning stint. He's been sick the last little while, hasn't skated too much, and the Marlies, they're playing quite a few games over the next couple of days, so just an opportunity for him to get his legs back under him, and also an opportunity for the Leafs to get a closer look at some other players on their roster. I know it's just been 3 games, and I know it's just in a depth role, but as Sam points out here, the numbers for Bobby McMann so far have been very encouraging, and he's slowly earning the trust of Sheldon Keefe, and if he continues to do that, it's going to be pretty difficult to take him out of the lineup moving forward. Like I said, I know it's just been 3 games in a depth role, and he is 26 years old, but he is 6'2" and over 200 pounds. I'm not saying that he's going to be anything special, but an effective bottom six forward is not nothing. And what I noticed about him in his NHL debut is that he's a very effective forechecker that's not afraid to go to the net. And we saw that a couple of times in that game against the Predators where he did go to the net, just nobody was able to get him the puck. And then in that game against the Red Wings, the goal that he had called back was a product of him going hard to the net. And even in that game against the Panthers, he had another good opportunity to score. He's got some good instincts. Maybe if you play him with some guys who are a little bit offensively minded, we could see some of that offense that we saw from him in the American Hockey League this year and even last year with the Toronto Marlies, where he did have 15 points in 17 games, 8 of them goals, and then last year had 24 goals for them. And with Bobby McMahon and Pontus Homeberg jumping into the lineup midseason and playing so hard and trying to establish themselves, what that does is it's pushing guys like Zach Aston Reese and Dryden Hunt and even Pierre Engvall to realize that, hey, the minutes aren't guaranteed here, and there are guys that could challenge for my spot on this team, and you've seen those guys step up a little bit over the last couple of games. And we're seeing Alex Kerfoot playing that fourth line center position over the last couple of games, and they are trying some different things there, but the one thing that I would say about him and even the other guys that they have available there, Pontus Homeberg this year, 42.8% on the faceoff draw. Sometimes the importance of faceoffs get overstated, but you can't have somebody that bad there. Even a guy like Kerfoot, 37.8%. So maybe you can add to the list of deadline needs is a competent fourth line center, somebody that drives play a little bit, but can also win faceoffs more than they lose them. Out of the couple of things that we've talked about so far on this video, I have the most faith in the Morgan Rielly thing just sorting itself out as the season goes along. But if it doesn't, that may be something that takes precedence over acquiring a much needed top six forward at this year's deadline. And that would be disappointing because the problem in the playoffs over the last couple of years has been the goal scoring. I think they were like 0 for 17 in deciding games on the power play. And some of that is just luck. But adding another goal scorer there or somebody that can help in those situations can maybe minimize that luck factor a bit. And like we said, we pointed out, another fourth line center, somebody that wins faceoffs more than what they lose them is really what I'm looking for. But somebody that also chips in, drives offense maybe a little bit, but is steady enough defensively. Not anyone spectacular or a big enough name, just somebody that fits that role. So like I said, I think that the Morgan Rielly thing sorts itself out and the Maple Leafs can go out there and acquire, your fourth line center, maybe another top six forward or so. I think that that is doable for them at this year's deadline. But like I said, we'll have to wait and see how the next little while goes. So make sure to like the video if you did like it and subscribe for more because more is always on the way. And guys, I'll see you again in the next one.